What is going on, everybody? It is me again. It's HorrorFan34, and welcome to another video. And welcome to day 18 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge in October. Now we are on day 18. I figured I'd talk about another underrated movie that I think that it's a pretty good movie, actually, in my opinion. It's a pretty underrated hidden treasure from the early 2000s, from 2004. I believe it's from 2000. Yeah, I think it is 2004. But I recently watched this film not too long ago just to refresh, because this was one of the films I plan on doing for the marathon, and I think it's a pretty good little hidden horror gem. But if you can tell by the title of the video already, that review is going to be on Creep. Evil Dwells Underground. Now, like I said, Creep was released in 2004. This is directed by Christopher Smith. This is the same guy that directed Triangle, I believe, with Melissa George. And he directed something else too, but I cannot remember what it was. I know he did Triangle, and he did one other movie that I cannot think of the title, but I think this is his best film, in my opinion, Creep. Now, the story is pretty simple. You have this girl here, the blonde-haired girl, played by Franca Potente. Now, that's an actress I've seen in a couple of other horror films. She was in Anatomy, and she was also in The Conjuring 2, most recently. She plays a girl who's at a party, and she's going to take the subway home. The train. One thing leads to another. She falls asleep in the subway, and she wakes up, and the subway system is closed. She's trapped in there, and she meets up with a couple of other people, like underground workers and some homeless people, things like that. And one thing leads to another. There is a killer, like a deformed killer, killing people one by one in the subway. So it's basically a night for survival, pretty much, being stuck in the subway system. And that's pretty much what Creep is. Now, the one thing that works really well about this film is the setting. I absolutely love the idea of having a horror film set in a subway system, in like an underground kind of like area. I love horror films like that. I mean, speaking of like films that are taking place underground, like I love Day of the Dead, because that was underground, but not like this one. But I also really like Chud, Alligator. I like those kind of like horror films that are underground. And I think this is my favorite film dealing with like a horror film in a subway system, and I like the idea of that. And I could definitely see why people would say like, hey, that'd be a really cool idea for a horror concept in a subway system. I think it's a pretty cool setting, and it takes place in London. It takes place in the London Underground subway system. But like I said, the main thing that really works about this film, like I said, is the setting. I love the setting, and I absolutely love the atmosphere that the London subway brings. It's very atmospheric, it's dark, it's creepy, and things like that. I also really like the look of the killer. Not too much makeup, because he has deformities, but not like to the extreme of like, Hills Have Eyes or anything like that. But he does have a deformity to him. So it's not much makeup, but it looks the look of the killer is pretty good. I think it's directed very, very well by Christopher Smith. And even though it is R-rated, it says strong, bloody violence. There's a lot of one of the few things that I didn't really... one of the few faults with the film is a lot of like off-screen kills, so there's not really a whole lot of gore, even for an R rating. But there are a couple of really good kills, like someone gets impaled in the head, and one person gets their head slammed into a desk or something like that. So you do get a couple of kills on screen that are pretty bloody. And I think one of the other few faults I have with the film is this character, the lead lady character. Not because of her acting. I think her acting is really good. I just think the way they wrote her character I think they could have done a little bit better job of writing her character, because her character is pretty snobby and, you know, things like that. And her arc, really, at the end, you don't really buy her changing her ways. It's just like, I think some of the things in here could have been written a little bit better. I think that's one of the few things that I think is a fault against the film, is some of the writing. Like, especially, like, and the other characters, really, they're kind of just there, you know, things like that. It's not really one of those horror films that's really strong for characters. I mean, there are a lot of really good horror films with really good characters. Tremors, that's a perfect example. I love Tremors as a horror film, but that has really good characters. I love Valentine McGee and Earl Bass. I love Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward. Those are really good characters. Other really good characters in horror films, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, that's another example. Because the characters of Tucker and Dale, things like that, are good guys in Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. Very likable horror characters. And the lead girl that was in Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, also a really likable horror character. I mean, other horror characters that are really likable, you know, even Alligator, you know, Robert Forster was a really good character in Alligator, and things like that. Isn't this is not really one of those horror films that's really good at, like, having strong characters. The characters are kind of just, like, the supporting characters are kind of just there, and, you know, I mean, the acting's not bad at all. I mean, it's not that the acting is bad. The acting is fine. It's just like the way they're written. It's like the supporting characters are kind of just there, kind of just, whatever. And I think the lead girl does a really good job in the acting department. It's just, like I said, the writing is not really up to par with some other horror films. I feel like they could have done a little bit better with writing. Maybe write her character a little bit better, because she is kind of a snobby, you know, character, but, you know, but other than, like, some of the writing and all that stuff, like, some of the characters are just it's still a really effective little gem of a horror film, in my opinion, because what really carries the film is the setting. I love the setting, and the acting is good, don't get me wrong. I just think some of the writing could have been better, but that's just me, though. Maybe you might not feel that way, but that's just how I feel. And I also really like the way it ended. It's not a downbeat ending. It's a happy ending. It's not a sequel bait ending. I like that. I mean, this film, in a way, kind of reminds me of a horror film that they did a few years later called Stag Night, with Kip Pardue and Breckin Meyer. I gotta be honest, I was not a fan of Stag Night. I just think, like, the characters in those are bad characters, like, except for, like, Breckin Meyer and maybe Vanessa Shaw. Like, those were good characters. Like, I like those in the film, but, like, Kip Pardue, not really a fan of him, and things like that. The other ones are just I think these characters blow those characters out of the water. But you know, in Stag Night, I hated the way it ended. I hated the camera work. I thought the direction was all over the place. It was dark. You couldn't see anything. While this one, though, has some lighting to it, because even though it does take place in a dark subway, there's a little bit of lighting to it. You can see what's actually going on. It's not shaky cam. It's competently directed. It's got some pretty good actors. It's just, like, you know, and the setting is great. I just think some of the writing could have been tweaked a little bit, in my opinion. But other than that, I still find this a very underrated horror gem. I love the subway system, things like that. And I think it's a very well-directed horror film. So I would definitely recommend you check out Creep if you haven't seen it. And also, too, what I also really liked about this, too, is the killer has, like, these, like, cages that are, like, underwater, that he keeps people and his victims, and they drown underwater, so that way the rats can, like, feed off them and things like that. So I like there's some really cool ideas, and I don't want to go into too much more about Creep, but if you want to see a pretty good horror setting and a pretty underrated horror film, I definitely recommend you check out Creep. So that is pretty much it for my review for Creep thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.